All right, this morning we're going to continue with lesson 213 on using ratio rate tables. And our I can statement is to be able to solve some real world problems using these ratio rate tables. So up here on the math message, it says all the comparisons below are ratios. And the first one says these ratios are rates, and these ratios are not rates. And we'll take some time here for you guys to think about this. We'll pause the video when we're in class doing this, and tell me what you think the differences are between these. Okay, so I'll pause the video for a second here, and then we'll talk about it. Gonna jump back in right now. The ratios are rates. Okay, if you notice here, and the things we've been talking about is that they're comparing different things. 12 inches in a foot, $3 for 1 pound, 6 inches for every 2 years, etc. Whereas these ratios, they're not rates. They're like 3 children out of 8 children. We're comparing children to children. 4 tiles for every 7 tiles. So if we're comparing different things, we'd be talking about a rate, and that's what we're going to focus more on now a little bit. So we're going to drop down and kind of model making a ratio rate table and solving a real world problem here. If we look down here at number 3, we're going to take a look at this one. And it says, Hank drove 120 miles in 2 hours. If he continues at that same rate, how long will it take him to drive 300 miles? All right, so we're going to go ahead and set up a ratio rate table here. And we make a ratio rate table. Simply going to make a rectangle, and we're going to cut it in half horizontally here. And we'll just make a few boxes in there, and we're going to make the 2 categories here. We're comparing 2 things. Okay, so miles to hours. And what they tell me is we go 120 miles in 2 hours. That's the rate that they're driving. Now, most of the time we want to get this down to a unit rate, and we know with the unit rate, if we get something with 1, it's a little bit easier to understand and to work with. So we're trying to keep these things, again, to keep the same rate, we have to be dealing with multiplication and division. And in this case, if I divide this by 2, the hours, I get down to 1 hour. If I divide the bottom by 2, I must divide the top by 2. So if I cut 120 in half, I get 60. So our unit rate is 1 hour, we go 60 miles. All right, so once we get into that unit rate, it gets pretty simple to see some things here and to come up with an answer for 300 miles and how long that would take us. Okay, when we're dealing with these ratio rate tables, guys, we can look at them from miles to miles and hours to hours like we just did there. If we cut 1 in half, we have to cut the other 1 in half. So you're kind of going from left to right here or side to side. And what you do to one, you have to do to the other. But we can also compare hours to miles, in this case, going from the top and the bottom. Okay, and that's one thing we haven't talked about yet. If we look at the unit rate, a little easier to understand, if I'm taking 1 times 60, so if I take this times 60, that'll get me up to the miles. If I take this 2 times 60 as well, that gets me up to 120. So I can see if I'm going from top to bottom, or excuse me, bottom to top, I'm multiplying by 60 to keep that same rate. So we can go from top to bottom or left to right. And we know if we're going this way, we're dividing by 2. But you can also multiply, and what you do to one, you do to the other, you'll get yourself an equivalent ratio there. Okay, so our goal is to figure out how long it's going to take Hank to go 300 miles. So I've got to get the top row to 300. There's different things we can do. You can list several different ones until you start to get close. If you know your facts, you know 6 times 5 is 30. So for me, I would probably want to do this in one step. I know if I take 60 times 5, I'm going to get 300. All right, so that gets me up to 300 miles. And then I know I must take the 1 times 5, and then I get 5 as well. So I know it would take me 5 hours there to go 300 miles. And how long will it take him? I've got my answer now. And it made it really simple there when I was able to get that unit rate and do it that way. We could have put a lot of things in here. I could have looked also this way. Instead of going 60 times 5, I could have said 5 times what gets me 300, okay? And for example, or 5 times 60, we knew we were taking it times 60, so I'm thinking what times 60 gets me 300, all right? And let's just show how we could have some different things here. I could have taken this times 4, and gotten 4 hours. Take that times 4. And I'm going to get 240. And I'll be getting close to 300. Sometimes you can see people can think a little bit addition with this, but you got to be careful with that because it's supposed to be a multiplicative rate. But you could see, for example, again, do a little erasing here. When I add 1 hour, so I can look at plus 1. If I add 1 hour, then this becomes, well, let's go from left to right here. If I go an hour this way, if I add an hour, then I add 60 minutes. So every time I go plus 1, I have to add 60. All right, so you got to be careful with addition, but it can be done. But you just don't add the same to the top as you do to the bottom. If you add 1 hour, you have to add 60 minutes. If you had 2 hours, you'd have to add 120 minutes and keep staying at that rate. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to look at these ratio rate tables to keep equivalent ratios. But let's go back to our 5 hours and 300 there. And we've got our answer. We don't have to fill out every box. Sometimes we get it sooner sometimes than others, and that's okay. Okay, so we'll be doing a lot of work and practicing with ratio rate tables to organize our information today.